What if the most powerful cult in the world was hiding in plain sight? Welcome to another slow episode of Boring History for Sleep, where we gently explore the darkest corners of the past to help you fall into deep rest. Tonight, we're stepping softly into the secretive world of Scientology, a strange belief system born from science fiction, turned into a billion-dollar empire of fear, silence, and control. By the way, what time are you watching this? Is it late at night, early in the morning, or sometime in between? Leave a comment and let us know. Now, relax your shoulders, close your eyes if you like, and drift with us into the terrifying cult of Scientology. It began not in a temple or a church, but on the battered pages of science fiction magazines scattered across mid-century America. L. Ron Hubbard was a prolific writer, churning out wild stories about space explorers, galactic empires, and alien civilizations. But behind the pulp and fantasy, something deeper was forming. A belief, a philosophy, maybe even a strategy. Born in 1911, Hubbard lived a life that blurred truth and fiction from the very beginning. He claimed to have traveled the world as a boy, mastered ancient wisdoms, and met mystics in the East, none of which could be confirmed, but none of which mattered to his growing audience of readers and dreamers. In the 1940s, as World War II ended and the world looked for meaning in the chaos, Hubbard introduced something new, a system he called Dianetics. He said it could cure all mental illness, lock perfect memory, and free the mind from pain. He wasn't a doctor, he wasn't a scientist, but he was convincing that the promise of healing without medicine or psychiatry struck a nerve with people who felt lost. Dianetics was published in 1950 as a book, Dianetics, the Modern Science of Mental Health, and it exploded onto the scene. Fans called it revolutionary, critics called it dangerous, but most agreed on one thing: it was unlike anything they had seen. The book described the human mind as split between two parts, the analytical mind and the reactive mind. The analytical mind was logical and clear, but the reactive mind was filled with traumatic memories called engrams. These engrams controlled your behavior, made you suffer, and could only be removed through a process called auditing. Auditing involves sitting across from someone called an auditor, who would ask you questions about your past, again and again, digging into memories until the pain was supposedly erased. Some sessions lasted hours, others went on for days. People began to organize themselves into Dianetics groups. They built little centers, they bought equipment, they called themselves auditors and preclears. It looked like a movement, but it wasn't a religion yet. The American Medical Association and the American Psychological Association quickly condemned Dianetics. They said it was pseudoscience, that it could harm people more than help them. But Hubbard had already seen the writing on the wall. By 1952, the Dianetics Foundation had gone bankrupt. Lawsuits were piling up. Members were leaving, and Hubbard's empire was crumbling. But then, he had a realization. If Dianetics could not survive as science, maybe it could live on as faith. So he took the ideas further, past trauma, past the mind, into the soul. And with that leap, Scientology was born. Scientology was no longer just about the mind. It was about the spirit. The immortal self, called the Thetan Hubbard, taught that each person was a Thetan, spiritual being that had lived countless lives, even before Earth existed. The reactive mind still played a role, but now it wasn't just this life's traumas. It was memories from lifetimes ago. Intergalactic wars, ancient civilizations, forgotten planets. He introduced the e-meter, a device said to measure electrical resistance in the body during auditing. The e-meter would help locate engrams buried deep inside the Thetan and allow for spiritual cleansing. This was no longer self-help. It was a church. And in 1954, Hubbard officially established the Church of Scientology in Los Angeles. He made sure it had all the markings of a religion, rituals, beliefs, clergy, and most importantly, tax exemption. Followers were told that Scientology could help them go clear, a state where all engrams were gone, where you were free from emotional pain, and finally, when you reached the highest levels, you could become an operating thetan, a being capable of controlling matter, energy, space, and time. The higher you climbed, the more secrets were revealed, and the more money you had to pay. The courses were expensive, the books were required, and the loyalty was non-negotiable. Hubbard positioned himself as a prophet, a teacher, even a messiah to some, and surrounded himself with loyalists who treated his word as sacred. By the late 1950s and early 60s, Scientology was spreading across the United States, then into Europe, and eventually around the world. But it wasn't just growing, it was protecting itself too. Hubbard feared enemies everywhere, psychiatrists, governments, reporters, and he trained his followers to fight back. They created something called the Guardian's Office, a secretive wing of the church tasked with protecting Scientology from threats. It would soon become infamous. Hubbard also began to vanish from public life, traveling by ship for years at a time, forming a secretive organization called the Sea Org, which he said was made up of the most dedicated Scientologists on Earth. New recruits signed billion-year contracts, wore naval uniforms, and followed strict discipline. They believed they were saving the planet, and even the galaxy, one soul at a time by now. What had started as a book on mental health had become a tightly controlled organization with layers of secrecy, a strict hierarchy, and a leader who no longer took criticism lightly. And as the movement grew, so did its darker sides. L. Ron Hubbard had built something powerful, something loyal, and something willing to go to extreme lengths to survive. The world outside was starting to notice, but few understood what was really happening behind closed doors. That is where our story goes next. The ocean was calm, but the mission was not. In the late 1960s, L. Ron Hubbard left land behind and took to the seas. He surrounded himself with a small group of devoted followers, and together they formed a mysterious organization known as the Sea Organization, or Sea Org. It wasn't just a name, it was a lifestyle, it was obedience, and it was total control. Hubbard claimed the Sea Org was made up of the most elite Scientologists on Earth, those who had dedicated themselves completely to the cause, to the protection and expansion of Scientology, not just for this lifetime, but for all future lives too. To join, members signed billion-year contracts, not a figure of speech. A real written contract pledging loyalty to the church for the next billion years. Because in Scientology, you don't just live once, you reincarnate over and over again, and the mission never ends. The Sea Org was run like a naval fleet. Members wore uniforms, saluted superiors, and lived aboard ships with strict schedules and harsh discipline. Hubbard named the flagship the Apollo, and it became his floating headquarters for almost a decade. They sailed the Mediterranean and the Atlantic, always on the move, always avoiding government interference. They docked in secret, stayed quiet, and disappeared without a trace. Inside, life was not glamorous. Members worked long hours, sometimes 16 to 20 hours a day, scrubbing decks, running drills, maintaining the ship, all while continuing their Scientology training and auditing. They were told they were the chosen few, spiritual warriors saving mankind, and with that mission came sacrifice. Food was often bad, living quarters cramped, and sleep minimal. Discipline was enforced through a ranking system, and punishment was severe. If someone broke the rules or questioned orders, they could be thrown into what's called the Rehabilitation Project Force, or RPF, a prison-like punishment unit within the Sea Org. The RPF was brutal. Members in the RPF wore black boiler suits, were isolated from others, and assigned degrading labor, cleaning toilets with toothbrushes, running laps around the ship, writing endless confessions called knowledge reports. They were told this was the only way to cleanse themselves of spiritual impurities. that only through humiliation and labor could they rejoin the ranks of the Sea Org. No one was forced to stay, but the consequences of leaving were terrifying. To walk away meant losing your community, your family, your access to spiritual advancement. It meant being labeled a suppressive person, someone who opposes Scientology and is therefore considered an enemy. Some people tried to escape by jumping off the ships and swimming to shore. Others were quietly removed and never seen again. And Hubbard, the man at the center of it all, watched from a distance, commanding his loyalists like a spiritual admiral. He rarely appeared in public. Instead, he issued policy letters and dispatches, setting new rules, introducing more complex hierarchies, and tightening control over every part of the church. The Sea Org eventually returned to land, but the culture stayed the same. They settled in Clearwater, Florida, quietly buying up properties until they had taken over the downtown core today. The Sea Org still operates there, with its members wearing crisp uniforms, walking in step, and living under rules that few outsiders can comprehend. They can't have children. If they do, they're pressured to leave or give the child up. They rarely see their families. Their pay is often less than $50 a week, and their lives are entirely consumed by Scientology. They are told they are saving the planet, fighting for truth, and defending the church against invisible threats. But what they're really doing is surrendering their lives to something far more powerful than they understand. Inside the Sea Org, questioning leadership is not allowed. Complaints are seen as signs of spiritual weakness, and absolute loyalty is expected without hesitation. Some former members have spoken out, telling stories of psychological abuse, threats, and isolation, of watching their friends disappear, of being told to disconnect from loved ones, and of losing years of their lives in service of a dream that turned into a nightmare. But others remain silent, unwavering, convinced that their suffering is part of a greater spiritual journey. The Sea Org is not a symbol. It is a machine, a living structure designed to enforce belief, suppress dissent, and preserve Scientology's power at any cost. And behind every rule, every punishment, every whispered order is the legacy of one man's vision, a vision born on the sea and carried into the modern age. The public sees polished buildings and red carpet galas, but behind the scenes, the Sea Org operates like a hidden government, forcing obedience with quiet precision, and soon that silence would be tested as the church turned its gaze toward a new enemy. An enemy that had questioned them from the very beginning, a profession they feared more than any other, a war that would reshape the church forever. In most religions, healing the mind is seen as a holy pursuit, a form of compassion, of care. But in Scientology, there was no greater enemy than psychiatry. From the earliest days of Dianetics, L. Ron Hubbard made it clear, psychiatrists were not simply wrong, they were evil. He believed they enslaved minds, drugged the innocent, and prevented true spiritual growth. But this wasn't just a personal dislike, it was a full-scale ideological war. And he taught that psychiatrists were behind most of the world's suffering to outsiders. This seemed strange, but to Hubbard, it was necessary. Scientology offered its own form of mental healing, through auditing, through spiritual counseling, and for it to succeed, it had to discredit the competition. So he told his followers that psychiatry was a global conspiracy, that psychiatrists were agents of suppression, working with governments, controlling populations, erasing spiritual memory through shock treatments and pills. He said they had destroyed civilizations in the past and were doing it again in modern times. According to him, they were responsible for war, crime, even genocide. His belief was not hidden in dark corners of the church. It was published, printed, and shouted loudly through Scientology's official teachings. In the 1960s and 70s, as Scientology grew more militant, so did its attacks. They created entire programs designed to harass and discredit psychiatrists. They flooded medical boards with complaints, sent undercover members to psychiatric conferences, and used lawsuits as weapons of disruption. They weren't just criticizing the field, they were trying to destroy it. In 1969, the church founded an organization that still exists today, the Citizens Commission on Human Rights, or CCHR. It sounds like a government agency, but it's not. It's a Scientology front group. It's fully dedicated to attacking psychiatry worldwide. The CCHR runs museums, publishes books, produces films, and lobbies lawmakers, all with the goal of convincing the public that psychiatry is dangerous. They use testimonies from patients who suffered in mental hospitals. They highlight the side effects of psychiatric drugs, and they paint a picture of an industry built on torture and greed. Some of their criticisms raise real issues, but they are never balanced. They never acknowledge the value of mental health care or the lives it helps every day. In the world of Scientology, psychiatry is not flawed. It is evil. The war even took strange turns. The church accused psychiatrists of creating school shootings, of inventing terrorism, of spreading psychotropic drugs through government programs. The intensity of the campaign was staggering. Inside the church, members were taught to mistrust any therapy that wasn't Scientology-based. Antidepressants were forbidden. Psychiatric diagnoses were ridiculed, and seeking mental health care was seen as a betrayal of the faith. Even celebrities were used to push the message. Years later, Tom Cruise would publicly attack psychiatry on national television, telling people that depression could be cured without medication, and that psychiatry was a dangerous hoax. That moment didn't come out of nowhere. It was the result of decades of indoctrination, of teachings that told followers that only Scientology had the answers. And if psychiatry had to fall for the world to be saved, so be it. But the war wasn't just waged with words. Behind the scenes, church conducted intelligence operations against psychiatrists. They opened private files, tried to frame doctors for crimes, and used false identities to gain access to confidential information. This campaign was part of a broader effort known as Operation Snow White, a covert program aimed at infiltrating and neutralizing the church's perceived enemies, and psychiatry was always at the top of that list. Former Scientologists who escaped the church have spoken of how deeply this hatred was drilled into them, how they were told that psychiatrists were murderers, torturers, and that to expose them was a sacred duty. And yet, behind all this fury, there was a strategy. By creating an enemy, the church gave itself purpose, unity, and a reason to reject the outside world. If psychiatry was evil, then only Scientology could offer salvation. If the world was blind, then the church was the only one with eyes. It allowed them to isolate their followers, to control their health decisions, to sever their trust in doctors and counselors. It wasn't just a war on psychiatry. It was a war on independent thought. Because once someone gives up the right to question, to seek help, to find truth outside the church, they become trapped in a system that owns their mind. And that trap would soon tighten. The church launched one of the boldest and most illegal campaigns in its history. An operation so massive, it would involve government buildings, forged identities, and a scandal that shook Washington, D.C. But inside the church, they didn't call it a crime. They called it defense. It sounds like fiction, a secret operation with code names, disguises, government infiltration. But in the mid-1970s, it was all real, and it came from inside the Church of Scientology. They called it Operation Snow White, a quiet name for a bold plan. The largest domestic spy operation ever conducted against the United States government by a non-state group. At its core, the church believed it was under attack. L. Ron Hubbard had long been paranoid about government agencies. He believed they were trying to shut down Scientology, discredit his teachings, and destroy his movement. And so, he gave his followers a mission: remove all negative information about Scientology from government files, wherever it existed, however it could be done. This was not a metaphor. This was literal. They wanted to get inside government buildings, locate the documents, steal them, copy them, or destroy them altogether. The people tasked with carrying out this mission belonged to the Guardian's Office, a special branch of the church responsible for intelligence and security. The Guardian's office operated like an internal spy agency run by Hubbard's wife, Mary Sue Hubbard, and filled with fiercely loyal Scientologists trained in espionage. They developed cover stories, fake IDs, false names, even government-style credentials. They didn't just sit behind desks. They physically entered offices like the IRS, Department of Justice, and even embassies. Using forged documents, they got jobs inside federal agencies or posed as employees, family members. In one case, a Scientologist, pretending to be a lawyer's wife, gained access to confidential files simply by chatting with a clerk. Once inside, they picked locks, planted bugs, photocopied folders, and stole internal memos. They created entire teams devoted to scanning and smuggling documents out of federal buildings, sometimes hiding them in briefcases, other times in clothing. They discovered which agencies had classified documents on Hubbard or the church, and they went after those offices with surgical precision. In some cases, they would even break into rival attorneys' offices, tap phones, and track critics of Scientology through private investigators. The operation spread across multiple countries, including Canada, Australia, and the United Kingdom, all coordinated from the church's intelligence centers. At its height, there were over 5,000 Scientologists involved in covert information gathering efforts around the globe, but eventually they made a mistake. In 1976, 2 Scientologists were caught using fake IDs to enter a federal courthouse in Washington, D.C. They were found near a secure area and couldn't explain their presence. This triggered an investigation, one that slowly uncovered a trail of forgeries, break-ins, and stolen files. The FBI was called in, and what they found shocked the nation. In July 1977, the FBI raided Scientology offices in Los Angeles and Washington. What they discovered was unprecedented. Over 48,000 documents, handwritten plans, stolen government files, confidential records, even surveillance photos of officials and journalists. They found codebooks, hiding places, and detailed reports of illegal activities, all pointing to the upper leadership of the church. The raids were among the largest in FBI history, and they revealed how deep the operation went. Mary Sue Hubbard, along with 10 other top church officials, was indicted on charges including conspiracy, burglary, and obstruction of justice. They were convicted in 1979, receiving prison sentences ranging from 2 to 5 years. Notably, L. Ron Hubbard was named as an unindicted co-conspirator. He was never formally charged, and by that time, he had gone into deep hiding. He disappeared from public life, issuing statements only through intermediaries and leaving the church's legal troubles to others. Inside the church, the Guardian's office was quietly dismantled, its powers absorbed into a new division called the Office of Special Affairs, or OSA, a group that continues to operate today with similar secrecy to the outside world. Operation Snow White was a scandal, a criminal conspiracy that proved the church would stop at nothing to protect itself. But too many inside, it was seen as heroic. They believed they were defending their religion, fighting back against unfair attacks, and carrying out the will of Hubbard himself. That mindset, that willingness to bend the law, would become a pattern. Whenever the church faced criticism, it did not retreat. It attacked. Whenever documents were requested, they disappeared. And whenever someone spoke out, they were silenced. Operation Snow White was not just about stealing files. It was about sending a message. The church would do whatever it took to survive, to grow, and to eliminate anyone who got in its way. And in the years that followed, Scientology would trade shadowy agents for something even more powerful, a weapon of influence that would reshape its image and bring the cult closer to Hollywood's spotlight than ever before. He wasn't just a movie star. He was a symbol, a golden face for a powerful and secretive organization. Tom Cruise didn't create the Church of Scientology, but he became its most recognizable believer, And within the church, he was far more than a follower. In the 1980s, the church was struggling to clean up its image after Operation Snow White. The public saw it as dangerous. Governments were watching closely, and membership was in decline. Scientology needed something or someone to help change the narrative. L. Ron Hubbard had written long ago that celebrities would be key to spreading Scientology. He believed stars had influence and that people would follow them into the faith. So the church began targeting Hollywood directly. They built a luxurious facility in Los Angeles called the Celebrity Center. It was designed to attract famous people, actors, musicians, directors. There, they would be pampered, protected, and slowly introduced to Scientology teachings. Some stars joined and quietly left, while others stayed for years. But one man became their most powerful recruit of all, Tom Cruise. Cruise was introduced to Scientology in the late 1980s by his then wife, Mimi Rogers, at the time. His career was exploding with blockbusters like Top Gun and Rain Man. He found the teachings of Scientology appealing, especially its focus on self-mastery and control. He began taking courses, engaging in auditing, and moving up the church's spiritual ladder. As he rose in fame, his relationship with Scientology deepened. The church saw him as the perfect public figure to keep him close. The church poured resources into his personal life. They gave him tailored auditing programs, hand-picked staff, and private training. Even custom buildings and planes were arranged for his comfort and privacy. When Cruise divorced Mimi Rogers, the church stayed involved. He soon married Nicole Kidman, who was initially open to the faith, but over time she began pulling away inside the church. Kidman was viewed as a threat. She came from a family that included a psychiatrist, which Scientology deeply opposes. Leaders feared she might pull Cruise away from the church, so the church allegedly took action to preserve their influence over Cruise. They hired private investigators to watch Kidman. They even attempted to damage her relationship with her father. Eventually, Cruise and Kidman divorced. After the split, the church increased its presence in his life. They placed trusted Scientologists close to him and managed his environment. Cruise received the church's highest honor, the Freedom Medal of Valor. The award was personally presented by David Miscavige, the leader of Scientology. The event was private, but later footage showed Cruise smiling as he was celebrated on stage publicly. Cruise began speaking out on behalf of Scientology. He criticized psychiatry in interviews and condemned antidepressant use. He claimed that only Scientology had the real solutions to mental health. His comments caused backlash, especially his attack on actress Brooke Shields. She had used antidepressants after postpartum depression, and Cruise claimed she was misled. The statements shocked the public, but aligned with church doctrine. Behind the scenes, the church continued to elevate Cruise. They built him a custom SUV and maintained his aircraft with church staff. They treated him as a spiritual hero and global ambassador. Former Scientologists later revealed how much effort the church put into protecting its relationship with Cruise. They say he was surrounded by loyalists who controlled his exposure to criticism. Some believe he was shielded from the church's darker activities to the public. Cruise was a megastar with an unusual belief system, but within Scientology, he was a living symbol of success and power. He brought prestige and legitimacy to the organization. Every appearance he made at church events helped improve Scientology's image. New followers were drawn in by his fame. People became curious, and curiosity meant more books sold, more auditing, more members. Tom Cruise didn't just represent Scientology, he helped expand it. Whether he understood the full extent or not, he was one of its most powerful tools. He was the face of a movement that used fame to spread influence. But behind the red carpets and smiling photos, a darker machine was still turning, and the church's use of celebrities was far from over. It was only just beginning. Tucked away in the heart of Hollywood stands the church's most glamorous and strategic outpost, known as the Celebrity Center, where stars are gently ushered into the world of Scientology with soft lighting and velvet chairs and promises of personal transformation. This building wasn't built for average followers or Sea Org workers was scrubbing floors all night. But for the rich and famous, who could make the church look powerful and appealing with just one interview or magazine cover, the center was more than a building. It was a trap wrapped in luxury and charm, and it would become one of Scientology's most effective tools for influence and image control. Inside the center, celebrities were shielded from the harsh realities that most members endured, kept away from punishments like the RPF or disconnection policies, and given private spaces that felt more like a resort than a church. They were treated as divine vessels of public attention, told that their fame was a spiritual gift that could be used to help clear the planet and bring Scientology to the masses. Each star was assigned personal handlers who monitored their progress, their surroundings, and even their relationships, making sure nothing ever threatened their loyalty to the church. Auditing was presented not as surveillance or manipulation, but as a form of deep healing where they could remove barriers and unleash their true potential. While seated in quiet rooms with soothing voices and the gentle buzz of the emitter, celebrities were told they were special, that they had lived many lives before, and that in this life they had a mission to bring light to the world through Scientology's teachings and spiritual technology. They were showered with attention, praised for their devotion, and encouraged to become public faces for the church, whether through speeches, red carpet events, or subtle nods in interviews. Behind the velvet ropes and floral arrangements, there was a detailed system tracking each celebrity's progress, cataloging their influence, and deciding how best to use them in the church's long-term strategy for global expansion. Every quote they gave, every interview they attended, every fan interaction was evaluated, not just for public relations, but for its potential to pull others into the orbit of Scientology. The church knew that admiration could be a recruitment tool, and they sharpened that tool behind closed doors at the Celebrity Center, where image was everything and control was invisible. Some celebrities stayed for years, never seeing beyond the soft lighting and spiritual jargon, believing they had found something that elevated them above the ordinary and gave their lives deeper meaning. Others began to question what they were really part of, and when they hesitated or resisted, they were either pressured back into place or slowly pushed out and erased from the church's public face. No matter how famous they were, no one was allowed to threaten the image of Scientology, not even its stars, because disloyalty was the one sin that could never be tolerated. Even the celebrities who left often stayed quiet because they feared public backlash, private retaliation, or being labeled suppressive, and losing friends, family, or career opportunities tied to the church's network. And those who spoke out faced smear campaigns, orchestrated with the same precision as the church's recruitment strategies, with private investigators and scripted narratives designed to discredit them. The church could afford to lose a follower, but it could not afford to lose control of its reputation, especially not when that reputation was built so carefully on the shoulders of Hollywood's elite. The Celebrity Center still operates today with the same purpose, the same elegance, and the same quiet agenda, pulling new performers into its orbit with promises of clarity, success, and eternal purpose. It remains a shining example of how Scientology uses beauty to mask control and charm to silence doubt, all while operating just blocks away from the industry. It continues to infiltrate, but the deeper truth is that while celebrities are pampered and praised, the rest of the church lives in a world of silence, surveillance, and spiritual debt that they may never escape. Because at the heart of Scientology is not just fame or power, but obedience. And that obedience begins with one tool above all others: the quiet, mechanical hum of the emitter. It's in the auditing rooms that the church learns your fears, your secrets, your guilt, and it is there that the mind begins to surrender piece by piece in the name of spiritual freedom. And that journey into your inner world, masked as enlightenment, is what we'll explore next as we enter the dark world of confession, mind control, and the illusion of healing. Deep inside the walls of every Scientology center, there's a quiet room where time seems to stop and the outside world fades away, and that is where auditing begins. Okay. The person sits across from an auditor, holding two metal cans attached to wires, while a small machine known as the e-meter flickers to life with tiny signals that supposedly reveal the soul's deepest wounds. They are told this process will bring freedom and clarity, but what it truly brings is exposure, vulnerability, and a slow unraveling of control masked as spiritual therapy. The e-meter is presented as a scientific device, but it is nothing more than a glorified lie detector, measuring skin conductivity while claiming to reveal hidden memories and past traumas. The auditor asks questions again and again, slowly pushing the person to reveal painful thoughts, embarrassing moments, and secret doubts, while watching the meter needle switch. Each reaction is interpreted as a buried truth, and the goal is to find what Scientology calls engrams, which are said to be mental scars holding you back from spiritual growth. Auditing sessions can last for hours, sometimes even days, and followers are told to push through exhaustion, because breakthroughs only come after resistance breaks down. They are told to revisit the same memories over and over until they no longer feel pain from them. And when that moment comes, they are said to be one step closer to going clear. But in reality, what they are doing is handing over their innermost thoughts to an organization that records, monitors, and stores everything they say. The church keeps detailed folders on every member filled with transcripts of auditing session notes from auditors and observations from other Scientologists. These files are not treated as private or sacred. They are tools used by leadership to control behavior, monitor loyalty, and sometimes to threaten anyone who tries to leave. Former members have spoken about their confessions being used against them years later when they questioned the church or tried to speak publicly about what they experienced. People confess everything during auditing, not knowing how it might one day be used, from infidelity to illegal acts to moments of doubt. All of it is recorded and stored. They are taught that holding anything back will slow their progress, that spiritual advancement depends on total honesty and complete submission to the process. And in that belief, they begin to give up pieces of themselves, believing they are becoming free, when in fact they are becoming bound tighter and tighter. Auditors are trained to remain calm and detached, never reacting, no matter what is said, always guiding the person deeper using a precise script written by the church. They are not counselors or therapists. They are enforcers of doctrine, helping members peel back their emotional layers until only the teachings of Scientology remain. And once someone has been through enough auditing, they begin to internalize the process, censoring their own thoughts before they even reach the surface. As members move up the spiritual ladder, they begin to access more advanced levels of auditing, known as the operating thetan levels or OT levels. Each level comes with a new set of teachings, new equipment, and new revelations about the universe, the soul, and humanity's secret history. But access to these levels costs money, tens of thousands of dollars or more. And the deeper one goes, the harder it becomes to turn back. The OT levels include teachings that sound like science fiction stories filled with alien civilizations, ancient wars, and the infamous tale of Xenu, galactic overlord who supposedly caused Earth's suffering. New members are not told these stories until much later, and when they are finally revealed, they are warned that reading them without proper preparation would cause mental harm. It's a tactic designed to build mystery, create fear, and keep followers dependent on the church for guidance and protection. Some who reach these upper levels begin to see cracks in the system, questioning whether these cosmic tales hold any real truth. But by then, they have already invested years of time, relationships, and money into the journey, and walking away means losing everything they built within the church. So, many choose to stay silent, continuing the process, pretending to believe, and smiling through the confusion as the auditing needle keeps twitching back and forth. Auditing is sold as a tool of liberation, a way to reach spiritual clarity and emotional peace. But in practice, it becomes a quiet form of control, making followers doubt their instincts, fear their own thoughts, and place all trust in the system. It replaces critical thinking with repetition and slowly teaches the mind to obey without resistance and to confess without question. And once someone has been conditioned to accept this kind of control, the church can push them further, isolate them deeper, and cut them off from anything that might wake them up. Control gets really scary when the church tells members to cut ties with family and its friends through something called disconnection, a brutal tactic that breaks families apart in the name of loyalty to the cause. And that's where our journey goes next. One of the quietest and most painful tools used by the church is something called disconnection, a rule that tells members to cut ties with anyone who questions Scientology, even if that person is family. It sounds too cruel to be real, but inside the church, it is taught as necessary. A spiritual protection that shields the member from negative energy and harmful influence. The person being cut off is labeled a suppressive person, someone who speaks out, disagrees, or simply walks away from the teachings they once followed. When someone is declared suppressive, their name is written down and passed through church networks. Their photo may be shown to other members, and a quiet message is sent to stay away. The member is told that keeping contact with a suppressive person could threaten their own spiritual progress, that any communication could pull them off the path to salvation. The pressure builds slowly, sometimes a quiet conversation, other times a formal letter. But the result is always the same. Silence replaces love. This rule of disconnection doesn't just target critics or enemies. It targets mothers, fathers, sisters, and best friends. A son who leaves the church may find himself completely alone. Parents won't return calls. Old friends disappear overnight, and doors once open are now tightly shut. All of it justified with one phrase. That person is a suppressive influence and must be removed from your life to keep your spirit clean. Many members obey the rule without hesitation. They believe they are protecting their future, their soul, and a mission to clear the planet. They're told it is a sacrifice they must make. That pain now means spiritual joy later. That obedience is the highest form of love. And in that belief, they let go of the people who love them most, often with tears and confusion hidden behind forced smiles. For those on the outside, the experience is like being erased. Phone calls go unanswered. Emails are returned unread. Holidays are passed in silence. No explanation is given. Just distance, like a shadow, falling across a warm memory and leaving only cold behind. They try to reach out, to explain, to fix it, but the church teaches that even listening to a suppressive person is a sign of weakness. Inside the church, these decisions are often celebrated. Disconnection is seen as strength, loyalty, purity of purpose. There may be small ceremonies, letters of recognition, moments where the member is praised for standing firm. But inside many hearts, there is still a quiet ache, a silent wondering if love was meant to be so conditional. Former members speak of disconnection as one of the most damaging parts of their experience. Some say the pain of losing their children or parents never truly fades. It lingers like a fog they carry everywhere. And even after leaving the church, healing those bonds can take years or may never come at all. The church denies that disconnection is forced, claiming it is always a personal choice. But countless stories say otherwise. People are pressured, warned, threatened with being declared suppressive themselves if they refuse to comply. The choice becomes survival inside the church or love outside of it. And in that moment, many choose survival. Disconnection is not a public spectacle. It happens in whispers, closed rooms, quiet signatures, but the impact ripples outward, shaping generations, breaking families, turning love into silence. And for every member who obeys, there's someone out there sitting by the phone, waiting for a call that never comes. Some find comfort in others who have left. They form quiet support groups, shared stories, gentle understanding. They remind each other that they are not alone, that they are not broken, that the love they gave was real. And slowly, piece by piece, they build a life outside the silence. The rule of disconnection shows how deep the church's control goes, not just over minds, but over hearts. It turns a natural warmth of family into something to be feared, and uses that fear to maintain loyalty. And once that bond is broken, the church knows it has more power than ever. With no family left to turn to, many members fall deeper into the fold. Isolated, obedient, and desperate to avoid being labeled next. And in that isolation, the church pushes harder, enforcing discipline through secret punishments and silent walls. One of the darkest of these punishments is something called the hole, a place so secret and so terrifying that few even knew it existed. Deep within the hidden world of the Sea Org lies a place that few have seen and even fewer have spoken about without trembling. It is not marked on maps or shown in glossy church photos. It is called the Hole. The name sounds simple, almost harmless, but what it represents is one of the most secretive and disturbing punishments used within the church's inner circle. It's a place filled with silence, isolation, and fear, not created by chains or walls, but by beliefs and obedience that run so deep it feels impossible to break free. The Hole is at the Gold Base in California, a private, heavily guarded spot where the most dedicated Sea Org members live and work around the clock. Officially, it does not exist, and the church denies its purpose, but former members have described it in quiet detail as a set of double-wide trailers turned into a prison. Windows are sealed tight, doors are locked, and those inside are left to sleep on the floors, eat scraps, and face a cycle of humiliation day after day. Those sent to the Hole are not criminals in the usual sense. They are high-ranking members who fell out of favor, challenged leadership, or failed to meet impossible expectations. Many were executives within the church who once had power but made a mistake or asked the wrong question, and suddenly everything changed. They were told they were suppressive, told they needed to confess, and the only way to prove loyalty was to submit completely. Inside the Hole, they were made to perform bizarre punishments like shouting at chairs that represented their failures, or writing endless self-criticisms through the night. They were told they were dangerous, that they had betrayed the mission, and they had to work their way back to spiritual purity. This could last days, weeks, or even years, with no clear rules. No set time, only the will of the leadership deciding when or if they could be forgiven. Meals were brought in on paper plates, eaten in silence, or while being screamed at by fellow inmates, forced to take part in group confessions and attacks. People slept on dirty floors, under flickering lights, wearing the same clothes for days, unable to shower or see the outside world. They were guarded closely, watched at all times, and told that escape meant losing everything they had ever worked for, including their soul's salvation. The fear of being sent to the Hole was so intense that many Sea Org members just kept their heads down, followed orders, and avoided questions. It was not just about punishment, it was about example, showing everyone what would happen if they strayed from absolute loyalty. And in that fear, the church maintained control without needing walls, fences, or armed guards, just belief and the threat of total isolation. Former members say the psychological damage caused by the Hole is hard to explain and harder to heal. Many left the church with deep anxiety, nightmares, and guilt, unable to understand how they had accepted such cruelty in the name of faith. Some still carry shame from what they did while inside, yelling at others, staying silent when someone cried, or choosing to survive instead of speak out. Outside the church, stories of the Hole began to spread slowly through interviews, documentaries, and leaked testimonies. The church responded with silence, denial, and legal threats, trying to erase the growing shadow that threatened its image. The truth just wouldn't stay hidden, right? Every new voice that stepped up just piled on the weight of this quiet truth that something was really off inside those walls. The Hole is the dark mirror of everything. The church claims to be a place that promises salvation, but delivers fear, where healing becomes punishment and silence becomes survival. It is the end point of a journey that starts with a book and ends in captivity. All held together by belief, and the ones who survive it rarely come out the same, if they come out at all. As the world outside begins to understand these hidden truths, there is still one question that lingers like a whisper in the dark. How did it grow so large, so powerful, so untouchable in plain sight, while so many suffered quietly within? The answer lies in its legacy, the stories it erased, the voices it silenced, and the fear it still casts over those who dare to speak. The story of Scientology does not end with headlines or scandals or celebrity interviews, because so much of it still lives in quiet places behind closed doors where belief lingers and silence becomes a habit. It lives in the long hallways of buildings that shine on the outside, while inside people walk in single file under watchful eyes, wearing uniforms and repeating scripts with no room for doubt. It lives in the hearts of those who carry memories they can't explain. It's that deep pain from loving something that asks for everything in return. A lot of people joined the church hoping to grow, heal their past, and find a brighter future. Instead, they ended up in a system that rewards following the rules and punishes curiosity. They believed in the words, the courses, the promises that pain could be erased and happiness could be guaranteed. And for a while, that belief felt real, because everyone around them smiled and nodded. But slowly, the rules took hold, the expectations grew, and the church became less about truth and more about control, masked in the soft language of spiritual growth. Those who left often did so in silence, afraid of being declared suppressive, afraid of losing their families, afraid of being hunted by private investigators or targeted online by smear campaigns. Even now, some of them speak with their faces hidden and their voices disguised, because the fear does not fade quickly when you've lived in a system that trained you to be afraid of everything outside. Still, they speak because staying silent means the system continues unchallenged, and they know that each whispered story chips away at the illusion of safety. The church has built Scientology's legacy. It's not just the buildings or the books or the famous names. It's the thousands of people who gave years of their lives to something that promised peace but delivered pressure. It's the children raised inside who were taught not to ask questions, to report on their parents if they spoke wrong, to choose duty over dreams, and to fear the outside world. Many of them walk away as adults, confused and broken, trying to build new lives in a world they were taught to hate and fear from the very beginning. Even now, the church operates quietly behind its perfect glass walls. It's claiming to offer freedom while using contracts, rules, and secrets to keep followers locked into routines they didn't choose. The buildings are spotless, the staff is polite, and the materials are well produced, but none of that shows the punishment. It's a disconnection, the fear of making a single mistake. People walk past those buildings every day, not knowing what happens on the floors above, behind the conference rooms and auditing tables, and the soft hum of the e-meter. Inside, there are members who haven't spoken to their parents in years because they were told to disconnect, and members who signed billion-year contracts and now work for less than minimum wage with no vacations. Some say they're fine that they chose this path, that it brings meaning. But when you dig deeper, there is exhaustion and confusion. It's hidden behind tired smiles. There is loyalty that feels more like survival, and silence that feels more like habit, because questioning anything means risking everything. The leadership stays out of sight, rarely answering questions, and always speaking with careful language about expansion and growth, while ignoring the human cost. They say critics are liars, that former members are bitter, and that everything is done with compassion and purpose. But those words fall flat against the mountain of stories that say otherwise. And still, they continue undisturbed, protected by laws, by money, by the complexity of a system built to look harmless on the outside. For those who have escaped the church, there is pain, but there is also hope in rebuilding a life, in reconnecting with family, and finding others who understand what it means to come out the other side. They share their stories not to destroy, but to warn, to comfort, to give others the strength to leave when they are ready, and the tools to survive once they do. And in those stories, there is a quiet resistance, one that grows stronger each time a voice speaks through the fear and says, "This happened to me, and it was real." As we reach the end of this slow descent into the terrifying world of Scientology, let your breath become calm and your thoughts soften as the noise fades into the background. Let the knowledge settle not with fear, but with understanding, that the most dangerous control often comes not with threats, but with soft promises and slow changes. And know that even in the darkest systems, there are cracks where light can slip through, where voices can rise, where silence can finally be broken. If you know someone who has walked this path, hold space for them, because healing takes time and rebuilding trust takes even longer, especially when faith was once used as a weapon. And if you are someone still inside, wondering if the doubts in your heart are worth listening to, remember that peace should not come at the cost of your voice or your freedom or your love. You deserve a life where questions are not punishable, and where truth is not a trap, and wherever you are on your journey, you are not alone, and you are not wrong for wanting something better. Now, let your eyes grow heavy, your breath slower, your body still as the weight of this story sinks gently into the quiet of night. Let the final echoes of this tale fade into a soft hush, where fear dissolves into distance and understanding becomes a warm and silent friend. 'Cause you made it here, and now you can rest. The story of Scientology doesn't end with the people who left or the stories that surfaced, but the questions that were asked in front of cameras, because so much of it still continues. Behind soft smiles and quiet buildings where the lights stay on and the whispers never stop, it lives in the routines of those who rise early in Sea Org uniforms, performing tasks with precision because they believe they are saving the world, even when they no longer know exactly how. It's the quiet heartache of those who can't reach out to their families because they were told to cut ties, spending holidays in silence, secretly wishing for a message that never arrives. Many who entered the church were looking for something better, a sense of control or peace or purpose, and they were offered all of that with books and courses and glowing promises of freedom. They were told they could unlock hidden power, that their suffering could be erased, and that the path to truth had already been paved by someone who understood the universe itself. And for a while, it felt real because everyone around them believed too, and when doubt appeared, they were reminded that doubt was just weakness hiding in the mind, waiting to be removed. The further someone climbed, the tighter the circle became, and the more isolated they felt from everything outside the church. Because that outside world was framed as dangerous, full of lies and traps and threats. If you questioned anything, you weren't brave, you were disloyal. And if you spoke out, you weren't honest, you were suppressive. And in that world of rules, silence became the safest sound. Those who left often carried a fear that never fully faded because the church didn't let go easily. And even years later, they'd wonder if someone was still watching or waiting or listening from far away. Scientology's legacy is wrapped in polished buildings and neatly folded uniforms. But beneath that is a history shaped by control, by separation, and by promises that always came with a price. It's in the lives of those who poured their hearts into a mission, only to wake up and realize they gave everything to something that offered so little in return. And it's found in the people who stayed, not because they believed, but because they were afraid of what would happen if they didn't. The church continues to operate across cities and countries, under tax-exempt status and legal protections, claiming to be a religion that heals and uplifts and fights for freedom. It hosts ribbon cuttings and press events, and prints glossy magazines that show nothing of the punishments, the silence, the disconnection, or the fear that keeps many followers in line. Its leaders speak of expansion, of truth, of saving humanity, but rarely speak of those who left broken and grieving and unsure how to begin again in a world they no longer understand. Former members share a quiet grief that creeps in when your voice is silenced. Trust is shattered, and your past feels heavy. They find each other in small groups, in long conversations, sharing pieces of their lives that never made sense until someone else nodded and said, "Yes, I felt that too." And in that shared understanding, there is healing, not loud or fast, but steady, like a tide that moves in and out until it starts to carry the pain away, bit by bit. The church may continue to deny its darker parts, may continue to call former members bitter or dishonest, but the truth doesn't go away just because someone refuses to look at it. It remains in the documents, the recordings, the stories that cannot all be false and cannot all be dismissed, and with each new voice, the weight of denial becomes harder to hold. People are listening more now, watching more closely, and while change may come slowly, it will come. Because silence always breaks eventually, and when it does, it doesn't go back. For those who are still inside, who feel the small tug of doubt, or the quiet ache that something isn't right, know that you are not alone, and you are not wrong to feel it. There is life outside the fear, outside the rules, outside the building where your thoughts belong to you again, and where love doesn't require silence or obedience. When you're ready, there'll be people around to remind you that you're still whole, even if you felt broken. You're still worthy, no matter what you used to believe. As this gentle story wraps up, let your breath slow down, your body relax, and your thoughts settle like dust in a quiet, peaceful room. Let the truths you heard drift into the back of your mind, where they can settle without weight, without fear, without urgency, because for now you are safe and you are still. And as you fall asleep, remember that healing begins not with noise or force, but with stillness, with softness, with a gentle return of your voice.